Shalom, good evening.
Shalom.
Welcome to the practical Parsha for Parashat Vayakhel. In our books, it's on page 234. That is chapter 35 in the book of Shemot, in the book of Exodus. Now, this Parsha begins with Vayakhel Moshe. Moshe assembled the entire congregation of the children of Israel, and he said to them, "These are the words which Hashem had commanded you to do." Now really, the purpose of his gathering them was to tell them about the building of the tabernacle. We learned about it already 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. But that was really all God's message, God's telling to Moshe, to Moses. Now is the phase where Moshe says it to the children of Israel. Moshe is giving it over to them. Now remember, for them it's something totally new. This is amazing. This is a novelty. Think about it. This is something so special. Because after what they have done, this was really coming as an atonement for the sin of the golden calf. This was something so special to them. This was telling them that they have a means, they have a way of drawing down God's presence into this world. Albeit it wasn't like it would have been had they not sinned in each and everyone's dwellings in a full scale. Fine. But at least this. And this is a beautiful thing that God says, I still want to be with you. I still want to, so to speak, spend time with you. And I want you to give me from yours. I want you to give me your gold, your silver, whatever you wish, whatever you choose to donate. Or in the words of the Pasuk, in the words of the Torah, of the verse, to lift up, terumah, to lift up to me, you could do. It's all on your own discretion. But I will be there with you. But an interesting thing happens. Before he tells them the actual good news, he says, wait, you guys are all here gathered together? I got something to tell you. And what does he tell them? Work shall be done for 6 days, but on the 7th day must be holy to you. It is a Shabbat of Shabbat for Hashem. It's like a day of rest for Hashem. Whoever does work on it shall be put to death. You must not kindle a fire in all of your dwelling places on the day of Shabbat. Then he continues and he says, Moshe says to the entire congregation, saying, this is the word that Hashem has commanded, collect from amongst yourselves. And he goes on telling them all about building the Mishkan. And for the rest of the Parsha, he's going to say, collect the stuff and exactly what has to happen and the dimensions and so on and so forth. What happens here? What happened here? We know that one of the very, very first mitzvot that we, the Jews, received as a nation, even before, I underscore, way before we received the 10 Commandments, one of the primary mitzvot, and actually this is one of the most fundamental things in Judaism, is the mitzvah of Shabbat. Almost immediately after leaving Egypt, I say almost immediately, not within the first 7 days, but after experiencing the splitting of the sea, it says they arrived at Marah, and over there God gave them some rules, God gave them some laws, and the sages tell us one of them was Shabbat. So they already know about Shabbat. They've already been practicing Shabbat. They've already been observing the Shabbat. It's one of the first things they learned. Again, they heard it in the 10 Commandments, and they've heard it before again. Suddenly Moshe has to tell them this great news. Breaking news. Everybody gather. You know what it means? I want you to use your imagination to amass, to gather together all the Jews. You're talking about conservatively. And we do know that they had the men gathered separately and the women later gathered separately. Great. So let's conservatively say that the guesstimation or the estimation of the population of the Jewish people was about 3 million.
Wow.
Do you know what it means to gather 1.5 million people together, just men, and say, listen, I got some news to tell you. This is something earth-shattering. Guess what? You got to keep the Shabbat. We know that already. We know that already.
No.
What new is being learned here? What novelty is there in this? Sages tell us that it's true that the primary purpose, the main reason why he gathered them, was to inform them about this tremendously good news that they're going to build the tabernacle, they're going to build a dwelling place for Hashem. Moshe wanted them to know, and of course he was delivering God's message, it's not his message, that although this is the utmost important thing in life, to create a dwelling place for Hashem, to construct, and I use the word literally and figuratively, to construct an abode for Hashem, yet it cannot override, it cannot desecrate the Shabbat. And that's why prior to telling them the good news, he says, I got to remind you, 6 days a week we work, on the 7th we rest, on the Shabbat. Now it's very, very interesting that even though they knew about the Shabbat, but there's something here that's revealed about the Shabbat. There is detail about Shabbat that is actually of such great value that this is not just another mention of Shabbat. This is a whole new thing. It takes it on to a whole different level. And that is the following. Whenever you read in the Torah about resting on Shabbat, it says what? You should not do any work. Can you define that? Well, you said labor. Well, guess what? There's certain things you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. Open up the Code of Jewish Law, open up any basic book, ask a child. That is not labor intensive, and it's not work at all. In fact, it's pleasure. People will actually do those exact tasks for entertainment, for amusement, and not break a sweat. If it's playing a musical instrument, if it's drawing a beautiful piece of art, if it's somebody has a hobby of painting, but those things are forbidden on Shabbat. So obviously it's not about what the human mind defines as work, as labor. Rather, and this is where we know it from, those tasks which were prudent, which were key in building and the prep for building for this tabernacle, is what's forbidden to be done on Shabbat. In fact, if you look at the words, it says Moshe gathered the people, all the congregation of the children of Israel, and he said to them, Eile hadavarim. These are the words. The word Eile is Aleph, Lamed, Hey. Now we know that certain letters in the alphabet are interchangeable, especially when they look similarly alike, such as the Hey and the Chet. Why it was written as a Hey and not a Chet? However, if we do count it as a Chet, what we have is Aleph is 1, Lamed is 30, and Chet is 8. How much is that? 39. 39. Okay? 39, what's termed as 39 avot milachot, literally father tasks, meaning 39 main tasks that are forbidden, main tasks that were used directly and deliberately to build this Mishkan, including that which was necessary to, for example, plant the flax in order to have linen, in order to make the garments. So that goes in, that's part of the process, but directly part of the process. These become the 39, so to speak, categories of things that are forbidden. The sages refer to it in the Mishnah as avot milachot. Av means a father. These are the main, these are like the father. This is the parent tasks. And then there are what they call tuldot, things that are like offspring, things that are like subcategories. They're strikingly similar. They were not done directly in the Mishkan or in the process of building the Mishkan, of building the tabernacle. However, they are strikingly similar. They're one and the same of those main tasks, and they are forbidden. In truth, in reality, there's only perhaps 2, according to some accounts maybe 3, depending how you translate the words, of those tasks that are explicitly mentioned in the Torah. One of them happens to be mentioned here, And there are reasons why it's been set apart, and that's verse 3, where it says, you must not ignite any fire on Shabbat. Well, fire, it's obvious, they used fire. Even if it wouldn't say this explicitly, we would know that you can't make a fire. They needed to do, for example, to dye the materials, the wools, they needed to have fire, you need to heat it up, and so on and so forth. But for whatever reason, and certainly there are reasons, and the Talmud discusses it, it's discussed in Halakha, but this is not the venue for it. We're not going to pursue that as to why the Torah chose, why God chose to tell us this one specifically, to single it out. However, getting back to the 39 in general, the 39 tasks, it already tells us that it's not about what seems like to be work to us or not. You think about it. If I'm giving you the classical example, if I have dirty dishes for my meal, I can stand there, for example, with cool water, not to in any way trigger, for example, the water heater, so I can't use hot water. I'm not going to go into details, but just as an idea, I can stand there with liquid soap, wash my dishes, takes me a half hour. But I cannot just take 2 minutes and load up my dishwasher and just press one button and mission accomplished. So it tells us it's not about what seems to be hard work. It's not about if it's tiring or not. Obviously, you shouldn't overexert yourself on Shabbat, even in permissible things. So this is a day of rest. But it tells us there's something higher here. There's something more lofty. There's something more spiritual. There's a component here to this observance of Shabbat, which is not just the literal, logical, rational rest. Okay? Because then you can say, well, I sit on my couch and I just move my finger and I'm just clicking the remote. That's a great form of rest for me, if that is. I mean, personally, it's not. I don't have TV. But I'm saying is, understand what this is all about. I want you to look at it in the following terms. Perhaps this can really help the whole general approach to Shabbat and what it's about. Think of, I'm using this as an example, it may not be the best example, but just metaphorically. Think of somebody who just invested in a business. Put in a lot of money into that business. Now, what is the purpose of that business? The purpose of that business is obviously not just that you can say, wow, look, I did it, but also you want to generate an income. You want it to grow in value. And imagine that this person, foolishly, every single time a dollar comes into the cash register, they go, wow, look what I got, and just take it right out, and just take it right out, and just take it right out. You know that business, besides not having cash flow, you got to pay the vendors. You're out of business. You're done. You can't continue to deplete it. So the guy says, yeah, but I need to make a living. That's your problem. You have to find the means for cash flow and how to support your family. That's why not everybody can go into business while you're building this business. So it comes to a point where it can provide you. And then even then, there are times when you say, you know what? Right now, I got to throw into the business. We're going to have to run a sale. We have to run a clearance. We have to reinvest. We have to do a capital investment. Right? That's how. Do I sound like I know what I'm talking about with business? Mm-hmm. Think of it in those terms. Shabbat is that spiritual investment into the business. What is the business? The business is building. Just like then they literally built an abode where Hashem's presence will be. We are all collectively and all the time in the process of building, constantly building and improving on and rebuilding and improving on and rebuilding and improving on the collective abode for God's presence, which is, as the Midrash says, God desired to have a dwelling place down here in this physical world. And thus, the 6 days of the week is when we generate and when we work with the things. The Shabbat is that spiritual investment, where when working with the things, you're actually not gaining, you're depleting. You understand? Now you're not contributing, you're actually detracting. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Does that give you some idea? So therefore, it's those tasks, whether we understand them or not, but it's those 39 tasks, and nothing is by accident in the Torah, nothing is by coincidence. As they were chosen then to build that specific, about everything that it involved, this is what it takes to build the world, to make the world, to develop the world as a dwelling place for Hashem. These are the things you do in the 6 days of the week. 6 days of the week not only is permissible, Not only it's okay to do it, it's imperative. It's imperative. And that's why it says 6 days a week, work shall be done. You can't just sit around and say, well, let someone else do it. Everybody has their tasks that they have to contribute. I may not be doing all the tasks all the time, but collectively together we do all the tasks. On Shabbat, that's when God, the boss, the owner of this business, so to speak, and I'm using that metaphor, and I hope it helps understand it, is supplying us with that spiritual investment. So by us coming in, or today maybe it's not the case, but there was a time that when you were charging a battery, you couldn't use it at the same time, because while you were using it, you were depleting it, you were actually ruining the battery. Talking about the old, if you remember the old camcorders, okay? You either were charging it or using it. You cannot charge the battery. Now it's all different, so I guess but Shabbat didn't change. You still, while that universal battery is getting charged, you got to be spiritual. Now, of course, if you want to think of it from a psychological / spiritual sense, and so there's also the element, as Maimonides described, that Shabbat is not just about resting. That's a misnotion that so many people have, that, it's just about eating and sleeping. No. In fact, we call Shabbat, as it says here, it says a Shabbat for Hashem. We call it, or elsewhere in the Torah it says Shabbat Kodesh Lashem. This is a holy day. Holy means removed from the mundane and engaged in holiness. That's why on Shabbat, by design, the prayers are longer.
Yes.
There's the Torah reading. There's, as the Maimonides describes, the Shabbat afternoon, what a Shabbat afternoon has to look like, which is after everybody has prayed and gone home and spent time with their families and eaten and rested. Now you go back and the Chacham, meaning the teacher, the rabbi, the instructor, teaches the people. It's a time of gathering. It's a time of getting together to study, to become spiritually uplifted, so you can have that spiritual energy, you can have that battery charged for the weekdays when you are engaged in the mundane part of building a dwelling place for God. So this gives us a general idea, and I hope it helps. And I'm telling you that there's so much to know about Shabbat, and there's so much to keep in Shabbat. Not that one should get scared off and say, I'll never get it done, but that the beauty of Shabbat is, more so than any other mitzvah, in most mitzvot, it reaches a certain point where you've done the best. The next level is just not anything more tangible versus, like meditational. But in Shabbat, the laws and the details are such that you can spend your whole life studying the laws of Shabbat and continuously growing. Notice that it didn't say, finding out what you did wrong, but continuously growing higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. Okay?
Question.
Sure.
In the modern time that you could use Chabad Doral, for example, to learn about the laws, about Shabbat, you can do it on Shabbat?
No. That's precisely my point, and I'm happy you asked the question. You see, a person can come and argue, and that's what I argued about the TV. He says, look, Rabbi, I'm going to watch a Torah class on Shabbat. I'm not going to engage, I'm convinced, I'm going to do something holy. I'm not going to watch a movie. I'm not even a documentary. No rating, no R rating, no PG rating, I'm just going to watch a nice holy thing. I'm going to watch a movie about Jews, about Moses. I'm going to watch a documentary. I'm going to watch a video about the Rabbi. I'm going to watch a video on the Torah portion. What's wrong with that, Rabbi? Well, the answer is, again, remember, the Torah gives us the things, the rules, the 39 main tasks, and then there are subcategories, and then from then, of course, all the details which spin off into something different of what is permitted and what is forbidden. In this case, these are forbidden. Anything that goes under these categories, whether we fully understand it or not, I gave you just a general idea to kind of dispel the absolute abstraction of it, which is totally like, this doesn't make sense. But so the idea of Shabbat, and it's really amazing. I want to tell you on a practical level, practically speaking, especially we see the results in today's world. We see, and I'm talking out purely practical, down to earth. I'm not speaking spiritual. I'm not speaking from a Jewish perspective, from a Torah perspective, from a halachic perspective. Just practically speaking, the idea that no matter what happens, no matter what, that phone is not touched on Shabbat. That computer is not engaging on Shabbat. So it's not like I'm going to spend time with the family, and I am guilty as culprit as anybody else, okay? I make up my mind, I'm going to spend time with the family, but the phone rings, and even out of just curiosity to make sure I'm not missing an important call, or even just a text, hey, I'm going to be back later. We don't even notice anymore how that even subconsciously pushes away your the people closest to you. And I'm talking to myself now, okay? And whether it's your spouse, whether it's your friends, whether it's your children, even just stopping for a second, you've taken off your attention from somebody else. Shabbat, you don't have that. So when you're spending time with the family by the Shabbat table, unless you deliberately take something to distract you and bring it to the table, you're not distracted. You're fully present. Shabbat is almost, if you look at it practically speaking, because these quote-unquote old-fashioned laws never change and never will change. Well, now, one has a choice, like I always say. One has a choice whether they want to elect to keep them or not. But the law ain't budging. The law ain't going nowhere. We have free choice, which is God's greatest gift that He gave to us, humanity in general and Jews in particular, that you can choose whether you want to do it or not. But the law is what it is. You cannot manipulate it, you cannot change it. But because it's not changed and it's not changeable, Shabbat has its beautiful, spiritual, emotional, psychological, crisp integrity. There's something in Shabbat that unless you do it, unless you experience it, you cannot explain it, you cannot describe it. It's almost like, in a way, I hope I'm not oversimplifying it, but when you tasted something, and it's so unique that you can say, it's like caramel, it's like mocha, it's like chocolate, but wait, it's beyond. So what is it? I don't have the words. If you taste it, you'll know what it is. And you who've tasted it, when you smell it from afar, you can taste. You know it. There's certain things which are so unique that you cannot describe it in words. No matter how much you describe it, you haven't fully described it. You haven't done justice. And that's Shabbat. Okay? And that is what we're talking about over here. So, first of all, we're not going to be able to get into all the 39 melachot. So it's certainly a great idea for everybody to endeavor on their own to explore. And you start elementary. First, it's good to do. And if you want, I even have some books at home that I can loan you that are actually originally designed for children. But listen, I use them. They're beautiful. They have pictures, they have illustrations, what each one of the tasks are. Now, there's some tasks that are more practically relevant, because they're more practical to our times. Okay? There are some of the tasks that would maybe practically apply in our life, and even that very rarely, because they're just not done by us on a day-to-day basis. But then there are things that you wouldn't even imagine. They're like, what? That's forbidden? Yes. For example, borer, choosing. Now you know that part of the process of preparing flour is that after you crush the grains of wheat, you have to actually sift it, you have to actually winnow it, and you have to separate the bad from the good. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's a very big deal. It could even be a big deal. I'm just using it as an example, and you can go, oh my gosh, this is crazy stuff. But this is it. This is part of Shabbat.
Folding clothes.
Forget about folding clothes. I'm eating, I just have food on my plate. I happen not to like onions. So onions are good. Onions add flavor. For me, onions are bad. So I just want to pick all the onions out and push it aside, and it's going to go to the garbage when the garbage is thrown out. No. I am now choosing the bad from good. I can't do that. You're like, you're crazy. Yeah. But I'm giving you an example of things that can seem, the origin of the task can be so like, I don't work on a farm. What does that have to do with me? But the practical application of it could be, now look, if I have stuff on the table, I have a pile of nuts and some shells, and I go, I want to take a scoop of that and eat it, but I don't want to break my teeth, so I'm just going to pick out some of those pistachio shells, and now I have a full hand. I can't do that. I can pick out the good stuff from the bad, but I can't pick out the bad from the good. That's an example, and I'm showing you like, whoa, that's where learning the laws of Shabbat is really crucial. It's crucial. No, that's why, right, that's why you get fully shelled. By the way, that's why there are some people, for example, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, writes as a directive, not as a general collective one, but for his Hasidim, for his followers, to stay away from eating nuts with shells on Shabbat.
Yeah.
So, because then you're always going to run into a problem. Even not. Think about it this way.
Well,
Just giving you an example. Okay, so I have taken only the good from the bad, taken the shells. Now I have a pile of shells. That pile of shells is what now? Garbage. But it's not just garbage. It might actually be problematic, and that's another category. It's called muktzah. Things that the sages forbade because you don't have a direct use for it in Shabbat. And that's a whole category in itself. So now I have this stuff, which I don't really have a use of Shabbat. Can I actually handle it? Can I actually move it? Can I actually throw it out? How should I? You're like, oh my gosh, it's so hard. It's not hard. It's just a matter of knowing what you're doing, knowing what you're not doing. And that's why you'll see something very interesting. If I may suggest that one of the reasons for gefilte fish, and no, there isn't a fish swimming in the ocean that's called gefilte. Gefilte literally means filled. Filled. You hear the word gefilt. It's filled. Filled fish. What does that mean? It's usually typically several types of fish together, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know the exact race. Carp, pike, whitefish, and a little matzo meal, a little eggs. Now, typically the reason also could have been very, very, very simply because Jews in Europe did not have the means to eat a nice piece of fish on Shabbat. And because they didn't, but there is a virtue in eating fish at the meal, not just meat, not just chicken. So you got a little bit, a little fatty fish, which doesn't really taste good on its own. The carp, it's very fatty, that adds a good flavor. A little whitefish, a little pike. Mix it together, fill it with a little matzo meal, fill it with little eggs, little onions, a drop of carrots ground, and now you have a nice little fish ball, and then there'll be loaves or whatever it is. You see, that's where it comes from. But it also comes from the fact that a lot of these fish, these cheaper fish, have bones.
Indeed.
Have bones. So if you're eating, either you're going to have, a bone in your mouth, or you're going to pick the bones out before, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. So to make life easier, where it's all ground, you got no problem with that.
Right.
So you see another reason how things have become traditional foods, staples of at least Ashkenazi table.
Smoke.
But it's because of that. But it's because of that of the rules of Shabbat. My point is that once you become familiar or more familiar with the rules of Shabbat, it's not like it's difficult. It's like you're walking around all day thinking, oh my gosh, what do I do now? No, it's just a matter of how your habits become better. It's almost like telling somebody who's now changed to a healthy diet, oh, you must be suffering. No, I'm not. It took time to adjust, but once it is, it's just another part of life. It's part of life. You know what I mean? It just becomes part of your routine. It becomes part of your Shabbat, and then you grow. You get better at it. You learn more. And like I said, the idea is to grow, not to look back and go, I was doing it wrong before. No, to grow in the laws of Shabbat.
I got a quick question.
Sure.
Because you're not supposed to be, reading the Shulchan Aruch. You're not supposed to be actually studying per se, but
When?
on Shabbos.
No, on the contrary.
I mean,
On the contrary. You're supposed to. There's a virtue actually to review the rules of Shabbat on Shabbat. There's a virtue of studying the rules of Shabbat on Shabbat. So, and what better day to connect to Shabbat? And let me explain to you also why. Another reason why. I'll explain to you. Every mitzvah that we do, really ideally, we're supposed to observe the mitzvah on all three levels, which is machshava, thought, dibur, speech, and maaseh, and action. Okay? So maaseh, and action. So when we study about a mitzvah, what we're gaining in that study is that not only are we practically doing the mitzvah, we are now, if we're studying, verbally, we're talking about the mitzvah, and we're thinking about it. So now you have all aspects of it. So actually it's strongly encouraged to study the laws of Shabbat on Shabbat. In fact, one of the things that I mentioned before was the Maimonides describes how on the Shabbat afternoon they would come together to discuss the laws of Shabbat. And like I said, the laws of the Shabbat are so extensive and so intensive that there's no end to growing and growing and growing and growing.
Okay, is that limit only to the laws of Shabbos or to any other?
No, you can. Shabbat is a day to engage in prayer and Torah study. Of course, any Torah study, any laws, anything that will bring you closer to Hashem.
Amen.
Shabbat is a day. However, it's obvious that if you have a choice, should I study these laws or that laws? Shabbat is the day, maybe perhaps to be more focused on the laws of Shabbat. Okay. It would be more advisable. But you can study any laws, anything that's part of Torah. There is a virtue, and there are some people that are focused on Shabbat, not so much on what we call the revealed, the external part. There's no such thing as external in the Torah, but relatively speaking, the Talmud and the Doral, but on Shabbat, the primary focus, the primary endeavor is the esoterics, the Kabbalah, the Hasidic teachings, and so on. But this is not in any way, God forbid, mean to exclude that, say, oh, that's off limits. No. It's, of course, this is good, great, and this is even better. You understand? But that's only if one can handle it and so on. Obviously, it's not that, oh, we don't study Shulchan Aruch and we don't engage in studying Talmud and Shabbat and end up, God forbid, not studying anything. That certainly is not in the spirit of Shabbat. So we have some ideas of the beauty, the sanctity, and the flavor of Shabbat. Shabbat is just an amazing day.
Yes.
The worst Shabbat, like I'm saying, if you didn't have, is better than just a fact. And I want to share with you something that was said to me when I was 14 years old. 14 years old. I mean, not 15 years old even, not 15. And at the time, I really did not appreciate it as much as I do now. And that is, in Chabad, growing up, from young age, you're trained to go out there and help other Jews and spread the Judaism. And basically, on Fridays is the only day of the week that we got let out earlier from school. And the idea is it's close to Shabbat, you got to get ready for Shabbat. So we'd finish, let's say, at 12 o'clock. In New York, the earliest Shabbat comes in pretty early in the winter, 4 o'clock, 4:15. So what we do at that time, that's your own private time if you're a student. And remember, especially starting at the age of 14, 15, yeshiva goes till 6 o'clock at night, to 7 o'clock at night, and then when you get a little older, it's to 9:30. It's like you never have time for anything with, minus a break or two in the middle of the day. You don't really have time for it. You engage all the time in study. So this is your only time. What will you do? What do you do? And it's something to really, if you ever get to see it, it's just amazing. Hundreds of yeshiva students, especially, the subway stations that are running down, and we call them routes. Everybody had routes, and they were passed on from one group of boys to another, different places. Mine, I remember was, and for me, it was like coming out from Brooklyn, it was like this big world across the street from Macy's. They had like these little electronic stores and boutiques. Don't ask what goes on over there. I saw the way they're ripping off people. That I understood. But anyway, I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I could see a customer comes in. I don't know why I'm going this on live tape, but you see some tourists come in and they're like, no, but the other store. Okay, go to the other store. As soon as the guy walks out, they call the other store in Hebrew, blah, 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 blah. Don't worry, he didn't get that price lower. The other store, they were all in cahoots together, working together, 5 different stores. You know what I mean? That I noticed, that I understood. But this one store, this guy had, I remember, 33rd Street. I remember. And it was his little boutique, clothing boutique. I remember his name. I have no idea what this person is today. His name was Yoram. And I remember him telling us, some weeks he was in a good mood, and most weeks he wasn't. I guess business wasn't that good. He didn't always put on film. Sometimes it was a good high. And with these little kids coming in, like, hey, we want to put on film, a little bag. We had like a little, we called it like a little attaché case, with a little film in there, a tzedakah box, and some brochures. I remember him one Friday, he looks at us and he goes, the store was empty. I guess he wasn't having a particularly good day. And he says, you guys don't know what you have. You have no idea. Here's a grown man. He says, I have a son your age. He says, I'm here 7 days. I don't get to live. He says, you guys, no matter what happens, you had a good week, a bad week, you're happy, you're not happy. I'm embellishing a little bit. I remember the words he used, but it was something to this effect. Friday night, you sit down together as a family. He says, I can't tell you the last time when I sat down as a family with my children and my wife as a family. And today...
Was he Jewish?
Yeah, Israeli guy. We only went to Jewish people. I didn't just go to any store. And today I can tell you, as a family man, I don't know if I'm a good family man or not, but I'm a father of children. I have a family. Even if it's the worst week, and when I say the worst week, I mean family-wise, there's ups and downs. We're getting along, we're not getting along. Things are the best, things are the worst. The best of times, the worst of times. I have to make Kiddush Friday night for my family. I gotta be by that table. Any other time I may not. I may find an excuse to be in the car, to go fill up gas, to go do this, to go do that, to be on the phone, to read something, to learn something, even to do a holy endeavor. Help someone else. I gotta be there. And that presence, we're not talking, unless in the extreme case that somebody is using that presence to be extremely abusive. But even if as I say, I ain't in the mood, I do it. You become in the mood.
Oh yeah.
Okay? So that is amazing. When you're talking about but I'm only going to watch a video of Shabbat. I'm going to see a video about Jerusalem. Come on, that's in the spirit of Shabbat. It might be in the spirit of Shabbat, but it's still desecrating the Shabbat. So this is where you say, look, and again, I'm trying to oversimplify it to using our finite, extremely limited way of thinking to try to appreciate God's thinking. But look how beautiful it is, the fact that God made it that these laws don't change. And if they don't change, no matter how primitive they may seem, they're never going to change. No matter what era of electronics it is, no matter how advanced people are, no matter where technology is, there's always going to be that, and I don't want to use that word old-fashioned. Let's use the correct word. That wholesome,
proper way.
Holistic beauty of that simplicity. Now, make no mistake, we take advantage of every and any technology that's available that could be properly used on Shabbat. And here's a very interesting thing I'm going to share with you. We'll spend another few minutes on this, and it's an amazing thing. Look at the verse number 3. You must not kindle a fire in all your dwelling places on the day of Shabbat. What does this mean? I'm just using this as an example. What does this mean? You're not allowed to make a fire on Shabbat. Notice it doesn't say you're not allowed to benefit from a fire on Shabbat. So this does not mean that anyone has to, God forbid, sit in the colder climate, or sweat in the heat and not use an air conditioning system in order. In fact, if you don't do that, you might be, at least in a sense, desecrating the Shabbat, because now you're uncomfortable and you're supposed to enjoy Shabbat. Okay? So you're going to be very uncomfortable and even make yourself sick, which is another prohibition. You're not allowed to cause yourself harm, bodily harm in any way. So there was a time, I don't know if they still exist, I think there's no remnant of them, but Judaism has always been attacked from without, but especially from within. And there was a group of people, and at a time they were very powerful, they were very strong to an extent, that claimed to not believe in the oral law, rather to believe in the literal meaning of the written law, of the 5 books of Moses, the Karaim. And I think they deserved it. But the typical description of what the Karaite house would look like was Friday night, sitting in pitch darkness. Darkness. Dark. And cold, eating cold food, and most likely just bumping into each other and getting into terrible fights, which is normal. If you have no lights on, nothing, it's crazy. This is especially in a time when there weren't that many lights. You used candles, you used lanterns, right? Whereas a typical Jewish home, following what the sages explained to us, the meaning of this verse is, and the details of it, it's not that you're not allowed to benefit from fire, not like you're not allowed to have fire burning in your home on Shabbat. On the contrary, you should, as I explained, you should be comfortable. There should be wood in the fireplace. There should be lights. In fact, we know that one of the most important mitzvot related to Shabbat, and primarily for this reason, is what? The women light the Shabbat candles. And what is the reason for the Shabbat candles? The primary and fundamental reason for the Shabbat candles is that there should be peace in the home. The idea is when there's candles lit, and by the way, by extension, it means not only that candle, and nowadays it's not only that candle and that light in that room, but whatever light may be needed, so people shouldn't be bumping in. Literally, the sages, just to quote the sages, not verbatim, but to paraphrase, so people should not be bumping in to wood or into stones and thus causing them agony. And you know, when you hit yourself, you get angry, you lash out at the person next to you. Or if you bump into that person, both of you are hurt, both of you are lashing out simultaneously. It ain't nice. Okay, it don't go down very well. So the idea is, don't kindle a fire on Shabbat. You're not allowed to ignite fire on Shabbat, or you're not allowed to directly cause a fire to be ignited on Shabbat. You're not allowed to increase a fire, and you're not allowed to decrease the fire. Just give me a moment. And that's very important, by the way, because for example, the sages explain, remember I told you there's the main category and then the subcategories. One is not allowed to, if there's a candle burning here, which again, it's more typical in those days that you had a candle that you lit, a few candles around so you can see around the home, nice, beautiful ambiance. But remember, when you open the door or you open the window that's facing a candle, you're now giving it more oxygen. You might cause it to flame up a little bit. That's when you need to be careful. That's a subcategory. You see? So yes, there are certain precautions that you need to know how to take in order not to have transgressed this thing. But to have fire in your home, of course you need to have fire in your home. To have warm food, of course you need to have warm food. In fact, the reason why there is a tradition to eat the cholent, that stew, and you see that it's universal. Whether Europeans, as they make it, and it's called cholent, or as the Sephardim, they call it hamin, which is the Hebrew word which means hot food, and they make it more with rice or whatever was prevalent in their countries, depending on the place of origin. That's why you have the varying cholents or the varying chamin. The reason for it was to dispel this notion that the Torah does not allow you to enjoy the benefits of fire on Shabbat. Rather, if you do it the right way and you're not cooking on Shabbat, you put it up from before Shabbat in a permissible manner.